Britons.
Who are the Britons?
Well, we all are. We are all Britons. And I am your king.
Who lives in that castle?
No one lives there.
You fight with the strength of many men, Sir Knight.
Then you shall die.
Two coconut halves clap together, mimicking the sound of horse hooves on cobblestone. A king rides across the muddy landscape, followed by a servant banging the shells together. No actual horses appear. This absurd opening scene from Monty Python and the Holy Grail immediately establishes everything you need to know about the film's approach to comedy. Clever, economical, and utterly ridiculous. Released in 1975, Holy Grail emerged during a transformative period for British comedy. The Monty Python troupe had already achieved considerable success with their revolutionary sketch show, Monty Python's Flying Circus, which ran on the BBC from 1969 to 1974. The transition to cinema was both natural and perilous. Their surreal, fragmented comedy style had thrived in television's episodic format. But could it sustain a feature-length narrative? What's remarkable about Holy Grail's enduring legacy is how much it accomplished with so little. Produced on a shoestring budget of approximately £230,000, roughly $400,000 at the time, the film was essentially an indie production. The Python team had to secure additional funding from rock musicians like Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin when the original investors pulled out. This financial constraint would shape every aspect of the production, from the coconut horses to the infamous non-ending. Yet this modest investment would yield extraordinary returns. While not an immediate blockbuster, Holy Grail gradually built a devoted following through midnight screenings and campus showings, eventually becoming one of the most influential comedy films ever made. Its cultural footprint extends far beyond its box office numbers, with lines and scenes that have been quoted, referenced, and parodied for nearly 5 decades. What makes Holy Grail such a revolutionary piece of cinema? At its core, the film represents a perfect fusion of high and low comedy, intellectual absurdity married to accessible silliness. It's simultaneously scholarly and sophomoric, satirizing Arthurian legends, medieval history, and filmmaking conventions, while never sacrificing the fundamental joy of watching grown men hit each other with chickens. This balancing act would create a template for comedy that continues to influence filmmakers today, proving that smart comedy doesn't have to be pretentious, and silly comedy doesn't have to be mindless. What's your favorite scene from Holy Grail? Let me know in the comments below and share your best Python quote. The technical achievements of Monty Python and the Holy Grail are all the more impressive when you consider its severe financial limitations. Directors Terry Jones and Terry Gilliam, the only American in the Python troupe, turned these constraints into creative opportunities, establishing a distinct visual language that would influence comedy filmmaking for decades. The film primarily employed single-camera setups with natural lighting, giving scenes an authentic medieval atmosphere despite the ridiculous content. The misty Scottish landscapes provide a surprisingly convincing backdrop for Arthurian legend, with Castle Doune serving as multiple locations throughout the film. This 14th-century castle appears as Castle Anthrax, Swamp Castle, and even parts of Camelot, with clever camera angles disguising the recycled setting. Perhaps the most distinctive visual element is Terry Gilliam's cut-out animation sequences, which serve as narrative bridges between scenes. These surreal interludes, featuring the now iconic God who appears as a crowned head poking through clouds, weren't just stylistic flourishes, but practical solutions to filming challenges. When the production couldn't afford elaborate transition scenes or establishing shots, Gilliam's animations filled the gaps while establishing a unique aesthetic that became part of the Monty Python brand. The film's use of sound deserves special mention. Working without a sophisticated sound department, the team created memorable audio effects through simple means. The aforementioned coconut shells solved the problem of expensive horse scenes, while Foley work for the Black Knight battle was deliberately exaggerated for comic effect. The squelching sounds as limbs are severed remain hilariously disturbing nearly 5 decades later. Behind the scenes, Holy Grail's production was nearly as chaotic as what appeared on screen. The Scottish weather proved challenging, with frequent rain delays and freezing temperatures. Cast members would often have to trek through mud to remote locations, while carrying props and costumes. The The famous Bridge of Death sequence was particularly dangerous, with the narrow bridge positioned above a steep gorge giving actual peril to the actors' performances. Perhaps most fascinating was the leadership dynamic during filming. Terry Jones and Terry Gilliam's co-directing arrangement created tension, with Jones focusing on performances while Gilliam concentrated on visual elements. Graham Chapman, playing King Arthur, struggled with alcoholism during production, sometimes forgetting lines, but delivering powerful performances when sober. These behind-the-scenes conflicts contributed to the film's strange energy, with real frustration often channeled into the absurdist comedy on screen. The genius of Monty Python and the Holy Grail doesn't just lie in its technical innovations, but in the remarkable performances from one of comedy's most versatile ensembles. Each Python member brought distinct talents to multiple roles, creating a world populated by unforgettable characters despite the film's limited cast. Graham Chapman's portrayal of King Arthur serves as the film's straight man anchor. Chapman, a qualified physician before becoming a comedian, brought a genuine gravitas to Arthur that makes the absurdity around him even funnier. His clipped, authoritative delivery of lines like, "I am your king," provides the perfect counterpoint to peasants citing,
We are all Britons, and I am your king.
strange women lying in ponds distributing swords as a basis for government. Behind the scenes, Chapman's struggle with alcoholism created real production challenges. Yet when sober, he maintained the disciplined center that the chaotic production needed, much like Arthur himself, amid the lunacy of his quest. John Cleese delivers perhaps the film's most iconic performance as the Black Knight, whose refusal to admit defeat as his limbs are systematically removed represents comedy physical performance at its finest. Cleese's towering height and precise delivery made him perfect for authoritarian figures, appearing also as the French taunter and Tim the Enchanter. His background in law and his naturally imposing presence allowed him to embody characters whose misplaced confidence becomes their undoing, a Cleese specialty that would later define characters like Basil Fawlty. Michael Palin demonstrates remarkable versatility across multiple roles, from the mud-covered peasant Dennis with his surprisingly articulate political theory to the knights who say, "Knee." His performance as Sir Galahad the Pure at Castle Anthrax showcases his gift for playing characters torn between propriety and temptation. Palin's natural likability makes even his most bizarre characters strangely relatable, and his chemistry with fellow Pythons elevates scenes like the Bridge of Death sequence, where his panic feels authentically human amid the absurdity. The casting process itself reflected the democratic, if chaotic, Python approach to creation. Unlike traditional films with clearly defined roles, Holy Grail emerged from collaborative writing sessions, where cast members often created characters specifically for themselves or each other. This organic development process resulted in roles perfectly suited to each performer's strengths. For instance, the role of King Arthur was almost played by John Cleese, until the group recognized that Chapman's commanding presence was better suited to the part. The most memorable scenes in Holy Grail succeed because they balance intellectual concepts with visceral comedy. The "Bring Out Your Dead" sequence satirizes historical plague outbreaks,
Bring out your dead!
while featuring a man insisting, "I'm not dead yet."
I'm not dead!
Yeah.
The constitutional peasant scene delivers a critique of monarchy wrapped in anachronistic political theory, and ends with Arthur simply assaulting the peasant when logical argument fails. Throughout these scenes, the performances remain grounded in character, despite the surreal situations, a testament to the cast's commitment to finding truth even in complete absurdity. This balance extends to the film's treatment of Arthurian legend itself. While mercilessly mocking the romanticism of medieval tales, the film paradoxically captures the essence of quest narratives more authentically than many serious adaptations. Arthur's determination despite overwhelming obstacles and ridicule embodies the knight's journey, even as the film systematically deconstructs every heroic trope along the way. Did I miss your favorite Holy Grail moment? Tell me which scenes you think deserve more attention in the comments section. Monty Python and the Holy Grail's reception follows one of the most interesting trajectories in comedy film history. Upon its release in 1975, critical response was decidedly mixed. Many mainstream critics were baffled by its fragmented structure and absurdist humor. Vincent Canby of the New York Times called it a series of sketches that never build. Others praised its inventiveness, but questioned whether the Python's television-honed sketch comedy style could successfully translate to feature length. The film's infamously abrupt ending, where modern police arrive to arrest the Knights, effectively terminating the narrative without resolution, proved particularly divisive. Many viewers felt cheated by what appeared to be a lazy cop-out conclusion. What critics initially failed to recognize was how this anti-ending deliberately subverted the heroic quest narrative structure, commenting on both filmmaking conventions and the artificial nature of storytelling itself. What seemed like a budget-saving measure, which it partly was, also functioned as a sophisticated meta-commentary. Religious elements in the film sparked minor controversies, particularly the "Bring Out Your Dead" scene and the castle anthrax sequence. Some religious groups objected to what they saw as mockery of Christian suffering and morality, presaging the much larger controversy that would surround the Python's next film, Life of Brian. However, Holy Grail's medieval setting and focus on Arthurian legend, rather than biblical stories, meant these objections never gained significant traction. The film's journey from critical confusion to beloved classic happened gradually through midnight movie screenings, college campus showings, and early home video releases. By the early 1980s, Holy Grail had developed a devoted cult following who could recite entire scenes verbatim. The advent of VHS allowed viewers to revisit favorite moments repeatedly, cementing quotable lines like, "It's just a flesh wound," and "Your mother was a hamster, and your father smelt of elderberries," in the comedy canon. What's fascinating about Holy Grail's evolution is how viewer perception shifted over time. Elements initially criticized as flaws, the episodic structure, the metatextual elements, the deliberate anachronisms, came to be recognized as innovative strengths. The film's blending of high and low culture, mixing scholarly medieval references with slapstick and absurdity, anticipated the postmodern approach to comedy that would flourish decades later. Hidden beneath the film's silliness are layers of genuine historical accuracy that rewarded repeated viewings. The peasant scenes accurately depict the squalor of medieval life, while Arthur's quest structure faithfully mirrors actual Arthurian literature. Terry Jones, who later became a respected medieval historian, infused the film with authentic details that viewers gradually discovered over years of viewing. Similarly, Terry Gilliam's animations drew inspiration from actual medieval illuminated manuscripts, creating a visual style both historically informed and utterly surreal. Another fascinating detail often overlooked is the film's soundtrack, which uses legitimate medieval music performed on period instruments, juxtaposed with completely anachronistic elements. This musical approach mirrors the film's overall strategy of combining authentic elements with deliberate absurdity, creating a comedic tension between accuracy and parody. As audiences became more sophisticated about meta-humor and self-referential comedy, Holy Grail's reputation solidified as not just funny, but genuinely innovative. What once seemed like technical limitations or structural weaknesses were recognized as intentional artistic choices that expanded the possibilities of film comedy. By the 1990s, Holy Grail had completed its transformation, from cult curiosity to acknowledged classic, regularly appearing on lists of the greatest comedy films ever made. Which other cult classics would you like to see analyzed? Drop your suggestions in the comments and help shape our upcoming content. Monty Python and the Holy Grail's fingerprints are all over modern comedy, with its influence extending far beyond simple references or homages. The film essentially created a template for intellectual absurdism that continues to shape how comedy approaches both high and low culture. Perhaps most visibly, Holy Grail's DNA can be seen in the work of filmmakers like Edgar Wright, whose rapid editing style and visual gags in films like Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz directly descend from the Python's approach. Taika Waititi's blend of deadpan delivery amid ridiculous circumstances in films like What We Do in the Shadows echoes Holy Grail's commitment to playing absurdity completely straight. Even the meta-comedy of Community or the fourth wall breaking of Deadpool owes a debt to Holy Grail's self-awareness about storytelling conventions. The film's quotability has given it an extraordinary afterlife in the internet age. Holy Grail memes and references have become cultural shorthand across generations, with phrases like "'tis but a scratch" or "run away." instantly recognizable even to those who haven't seen the film. This mimetic quality has helped Holy Grail remain relevant in a digital culture that thrives on shareable, recontextualizable content. Each new social platform seems to discover the film anew, with TikTok users recently embracing clips from the constitutional peasant scene as commentary on modern political debates. Beyond its comedic techniques, Holy Grail endures, because its themes remain surprisingly relevant. The film's satire of authority figures, from knights to kings to historians, resonates in an era increasingly skeptical of institutional power. The scene where Arthur encounters anarcho-syndicalist peasants who question the legitimacy of monarchical rule based on some watery tart throwing a sword feels remarkably prescient in today's political climate, where the foundations of authority are constantly questioned. The film also contains a subtle critique of storytelling itself, particularly the myth-making around national identities and heroic narratives. By systematically deconstructing Arthurian legend, one of Britain's foundational myths, the Pythons were questioning how societies use sanitized versions of history to support contemporary power structures. This skepticism toward grand narratives feels particularly relevant in our current moment of historical reckoning. Holy Grail's influence extends even to serious medieval adaptations. Films like The Green Knight, 2021, may appear worlds apart from Monty Python in tone, but they share a willingness to subvert traditional Arthurian tropes that Holy Grail helped pioneer. The film made it impossible to present chivalric legends with unquestioning reverence, forever changing how popular culture approaches medieval storytelling. Perhaps most importantly, Holy Grail demonstrated that comedy could be simultaneously intellectual and accessible, philosophical and silly. This balance has influenced generations of comedians who aim to make viewers think while making them laugh. In a media landscape increasingly fragmented into high and lowbrow content, Holy Grail remains a testament to comedy's power to bridge these divides. So why does a low-budget comedy about knights who say "knee" and rabbits with sharp, pointy teeth continue to resonate nearly 50 years after its release? Perhaps because beneath its surface silliness, Holy Grail captures something authentic about the human condition. Our tendency to cling to dignity and purpose, even in absurd circumstances. Our susceptibility to myth-making, and our capacity to find humor in even the darkest situations. In holding up a warped mirror to our narrative traditions, the Pythons created something that transcends parody to become a modern classic in its own right. What other comedy from 1975 still generates new fans, inspires filmmakers, and makes people laugh out loud nearly half a century later? And that's no ordinary achievement. That's a holy grail of comedy. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Monty Python and the Holy Grail, be sure to subscribe for more analysis of comedy classics that changed cinema forever.